Next up, we're going to navigate back to the work item itself, and we're going to extract the information that we need to generate the hash code from the SHA1 website. Let's go to work items and click on the magnifying glass. It doesn't really matter at this point which one we click on. However, it probably is good practice to click on something that is relevant. For example, you may click on WI1 and it may have a different format. So it's always good to use an example that is as close to the real thing as possible. Click on the magnifying glass. So we're going to extract this information on the left-hand side. Let's take the screen scraping activity and we're going to highlight the information on the left-hand side, and you can see that UiPath recognizes that this is a set of information. Let's click on the information and extract it. UiPath will show you the information that's been extracted. It looks great. Let's click Finish. Okay, so what I've done here is something that I do quite frequently, and I've recorded the screen scraping within the existing component generic filter data table. This isn't right. Instead, what I want to do is create a new component called extract work item details. I'm going to do that by copying my generic filter data table component, because I quite like that one, and create a new one called extract work item details. This is a component that belongs to the Acme application, so we're going to put it back into that folder, copy and paste, call it Acme extract work item details. Back into my project folder, refresh, and let's open it up. So now what we can do in the perform actions section is take the recording that was just copied, Control X to cut, save the generic filter data table component, and place the recording into the perform actions section. Of course, there's a few things we need to do to clean up. Let's delete everything we don't need, the out array data rows, our log message, the screen scraping activity at the bottom, and let's check the arguments in and out. First of all, let's change the component name. Delete any unneeded variables. So in this case, we have a data table coming in and an array of data rows going out. That's not what we need. For this component, we're not going to have any inputs, so we can remove the in argument. Going out of the component, we're going to have some information about the customer ID, customer name, and the customer country. So let's create 3 arguments to store that information in. Change the data type to string, and do the same for customer country, customer name. Great. We don't need to check anything coming into this component, so we can delete that. Now, the variable that I just deleted actually was the automatic variable that was created by the getFullText activity when we pulled the customer information. However, it's not a very good name, so let's create a new variable and call it str extracted text. This should be a type of generic value, and let's change the scope to the whole of the component. Let's change the output text of the getFullText activity to our new extracted text variable, and the error message disappears. Okay, so quickly, before we do anything else, let's see exactly how the text has been extracted by UiPath. Let's use a message box, which is just a temporary way of displaying the information that has been extracted. Check that we're on the right page in the Acme system. Great. Let's run it and see what happens. So we have the information about the customer in 3 lines in a message box. So what we want to do is extract the individual information from each of the fields. So for example, we just want KI44163 and Edison, Byam, and German. To do this, we need to use some string manipulation. In the next video, we're going to split out the information into an array and extract the client ID, client name, and client country, respectively. Now that we have the information extracted from the work item details, we need to create an array and loop through that array in order to get each of the individual pieces of information. So let's take an assign activity. Let's create a new array of details, and let's just go and check the variable type. This actually needs to be an array of string. and we need to enter the following syntax in order to get the extracted text into the array. Let's use the split function, and when you select open bracket, you'll see that the split function is expecting certain parameters. The first parameter is our string, which is str extracted text. And we're going to split this information on environment.newLine. So wherever vb.net sees a new line, or a line break in our text, it's going to put it into a different item in the array. Therefore, client ID will be item 0, client name will be item 1, client country will be item 2. In order to see how the system has split our information, let's create a for each loop. Let's also remove the message box, we don't need that anymore. So for each item in array of details, let's simply log the item to start with. Because the item's already string, we don't need to put dot to string. And let's quickly run this. If we look at the output, we'll see that the items have been separated into different lines, exactly how we expected: client ID, client name, client country. Great. In order to assign client ID into our out client ID argument, first of all, we need to check, is that particular item containing the client ID text? Let's take an if statement, drag it into our workflow, and type the following syntax. If item dot contains client ID, colon, then what we're going to do is assign that particular item to our out argument, out customer ID. So we get an error message because at the moment item is an object. We need to convert this to string. So in the for each properties, we can go to the type argument and change that to string. Great, so now we've assigned our out customer ID equal to the item, but only on the condition that it contains the text client ID. We'll leave the else blank because there's going to be many other items that don't meet this criteria. And let's just check that that client ID has been assigned correctly. Let's use a message box again. Customer ID is, and out customer ID. Let's run it and take a look. Fantastic. Now notice that client ID colon is also included within the out customer ID variable. So we need to remove this. To do this, we're going to select item.replace. We're going to find client ID, because we know that exists within the text, comma, and replace it with 2 double quotes, effectively replacing it with nothing. Let's rerun it, and perfect. We now have simply the customer ID contained within the out argument, customer ID. What we could do is exactly the same thing for customer name and customer country. However, what I'm going to do is show you a slightly more efficient way of completing the same task and create a dynamic component.